pattern weights or pins. Which one should you use when you're cutting out a pattern, and which one do I use? These are actual pattern weights, so these are literally like discs of metal that you can put on your fabric to stop the pattern, put on top of your pattern to stop it from moving while you're cutting it. These are obviously just kitchen weights because realistically anything that weighs it down will work. These are pins, obviously more traditional, and you get different types of pins, like the little head ones. These ones here are longer, so you can use either. So you can either pin your pattern to your fabric or weigh it down. There is a bee somewhere in this room and I can hear it. I can't find it. So if you hear random buzzing, just ignore it. I've also lost my tripod or anything else that might help me film the video. So I wasn't going to film the video and then I said, no, I'm going to do one because that's what I said I was going to do. I'm sewing with lycra today, so that does slightly alter my opinion on the pins versus weights debate. And I'm sewing it on my dining room table, which is where I do most of my cutting. Either that or on the floor, but I'm not going to put black lycra on the floor because it will pick up all the bits from everywhere. So I will smooth it out, and I swear I spend more of my life smoothing out, straightening out fabric and finding the straight grain of the fabric than I do actually sewing fabric. If you're using lycra or anything that has anything stretchy in it, then when you put a weight on it, I think it can really pull it out of shape if you're not careful when you're trying to cut. So if you try and cut, the tendency is that you will lift it slightly or pull it slightly, and then if the weight is holding it really down, then it pings back. So I do think that using weights on lycra is not something that I would normally do. I've got weights holding the lycra on the table here just so it doesn't slide off, but you could use anything for that. You don't need specific sewing weights. You could put anything just to hold the fabric in place. But for something like this, as it has quite sharp corners and is quite a curved cut as well, then I'm definitely going to use pins. If you use weights, particularly on stretchy fabric, there are a number of things that can go wrong. So just this tiny piece of pattern, if you just put it down and put weights on it, which I do accept are way faster than pinning it, but there are so many things that can actually come unstuck, as it were. So this is down the straight grain of the fabric because it's on a wonky piece that's already cut. So the centerfold is down a straight grain, but it's hard to keep the pattern straight on the grain when you don't have the pins in it, particularly if you have something like a point, because you want to cut along the point, but unless you use something like a chain, which sometimes people do to get right into the point, then the fabric weights don't usually go all the way to the end. And if you pull it and the fabric pulls, then the weights can move with the fabric, and then you don't tend to get that clean cut down the edge. It's really difficult to just keep everything precise, to keep everything in place, and to not lift the fabric in any way. And it's not just with lycra, but I do think lycra is worse because lycra will stretch as you cut it as well. So you have to be really careful when you're cutting lycra not to pull it in any way, because if you do pull it, it sort of stretches and pings anyway. So I think there's enough to kind of concentrate on without having to worry about the weights as well. So for me, particularly on any fabric that has a stretch to it, then I just think that weights are so much harder. They look easier and they're definitely quicker, but it's so much harder to manage when you're working with a fabric that has any stretch in it. It might feel really old-fashioned now, it might seem really dated, but taking the time to pin into the corners and to make sure that your pattern is exactly on the right stretch of your fabric is so worth it. They say, don't they, measure twice, cut once. Well, I think lay out as much. Take your time in laying out and you will be so much faster to cut it. I use a ruler down the middle just to make sure that the middle of my pattern is still on the straight grain of the fabric, and then I make sure that my pins go right into the corners so that you can get a real precision cut in the corner. It doesn't matter how many pins you use either. I don't think that you can use too many. I think the main thing is to get the pins into the corners and into anywhere tricky that you think the pattern might lift off from. So maybe down the fold in the middle or somewhere where it might come away from fabric. But once you have your pins in place, you need to make sure that the pattern is flat, not on the stretch. So the fabric has to be completely unstretched underneath it and the pattern laid completely flat on top. And then once you've done that, you can lift the fabric slightly when you have it pinned. Not stretch it, it's really important not to stretch it, but if you do find you've accidentally stretched it, it's not going to make as much difference because the pins will hold it to where it needs to be. So then you can slightly lift it up and move it around, and it doesn't matter if those things happen because your pattern is pinned perfectly in place. So it's so much easier to cut your fabric, particularly as a beginner, but especially when you're using stretch fabric, to keep it flat and unstretched to cut it from a pattern if it's pinned easily in place. So that's what I've done with this leotard pattern. I have pinned all the edges, and when you have a curve it's so much easier to cut along something that is already pinned down. When you have a tiny little snippet bit like that, now I have extended the crotch ever so slightly because I knew that I'd slightly undercut my pattern with that one, but it's easier to just get those tiny little snippet bits as opposed to worrying too much about whether or not you're pulling it or you're pulling against the waves. And when you're cutting a pattern, the most important thing is to keep it as flat as possible and to keep it as true to the fabric as possible. So not stretch, not pull, straight down the grain. And I really do think that despite pattern weights looking easier, that pins are the way forward. It does take time to pin everything in place, and it does mean that it's longer, but I do think that that extra prep is worth it. It also means that you can keep your pattern piece pinned to your piece of fabric. So if you're working from a pattern that you've bought in a packet, then you can keep them pinned to the right piece. So when you're then constructing it, you know that you have that piece of pattern that goes on that, and you've got it all pinned together with the fabric, and you can unpin it just before you start to sew it, and then you know which piece to put to which piece. This is what happens when you use a door open. There's definitely a bee somewhere. I hope you found that useful. I'm not great with the technology, but I'm definitely good at the sewing, so I hope that you'll subscribe to my channel and stick around for more.